Hi, the success criteria that we are going to cover today is non-text content, level A, success criteria number 1.1.1, which is a part of the text alternatives guidelines under perceivable. So what is non-text content? Very simply put, non-text content is any content on the web pages or in your documents, etc., that are not text. For example, images, infographics, audio files, video files, just your captures, your form elements, all of these are non-text content. Even if you see the little borders and outlines on your website, this also would be non-text content. So any content which is not text is non-text content. So why is it important that we create text alternatives for non-text content? Well, simply because the easiest and the best way that any data can be understood and translated to assistive devices and all different modalities is when it is in text format. So when we have non-text content like images cannot directly be translated. They can't understand it. It cannot be directly consumed by assistive devices. And so they need to be translated, or an alternative in text format has to be provided so that all of this content can be consumed. Examples of the different kinds of non-text content you can find on a web page would be images, infographics, charts, also videos, audio files, also things which are used for decoration like outlines, outlines of boxes, just images that are decorative, etc. Also CAPTCHAs. CAPTCHAs are also a form of non-text content. The first and the most simplest way of adding any text, meaningful text alternative to an image is using an alt tag, actually an alt attribute. So within your image tags, you have alt attributes, and these attributes contain a value which is a meaningful text, which is generally the description of the image, or if the image has been used as, say, a button, it would probably have the purpose of that image, right? For example, a search, and you're using an icon, you wouldn't say the icon of a magnifying glass. You would say maybe search icon, or search, just simply search, right? So that's the simplest way in which you could have an alternative text, is using the alt attribute. Another way to have alternative text, especially for things like form controls um, and input fields, etc., is to use or to provide a label, right? So a very meaningful label that provides and describes the purpose. For example, in a form, you have the first name, so you have a first name label, and then you have your input field, last name, address. All of these are labels, and they are created using your label tag. This is like over here, it's mentioned if non-text content is a control and accepts user input, then it has a name that describes its purpose. Now, mind you, this name is very different. It does not refer to the programmatic name within your HTML tag. So you have a name attribute that's used in programming that within your HTML tags, right? So that's not what it's referring to. It's referring to an actual physical label, a visible label, or a label that's hidden but that's visible to the screen readers. So you either have like your label by aria labeled by, aria labeled, or aria described by. All of these add meaning to and an alternative text to the content that's there, and describes the content, right? So that's what they're talking about here. For multimedia, you would use things like text transcripts, captions, audio descriptions, media transcripts, etc. And we will go through that in the upcoming success criteria, where we have time-based media. So we will go through that at that point. But just to know that this is another form of alternative text that can be provided. Now, there are exceptions where a test, which if the non-text content is a test or exercise, that would be invalid if presented in text. Then text alternatives at least provide descriptive identification of the non-text content. What's a descriptive identification? Descriptive identification would be something that suggests what that thing is. Like, for example, this is a test, or this is a test for something, right? So just that descriptive identification of the non-text content, not providing all the information that will give away the answers, etc. So you don't want to do that. Also sensory, there are specific sensory experiences, like you're listening to a concert or you're watching a concert video. Now, you can't translate every piece of music that's on there. So in these cases, descriptive identification works within the alt text. You don't, as an alternative, and you don't need to describe the entire video. Or yeah, but speech does need to be translated. So this is an exception where you have sensory experiences. The example that WCAG gives you is that of a flute performance, a solo flute performance. So you can translate all the notes on the flute performance. Well, you could if you want to, but technically it's not needed. You can't. So then that's an exception here. Also CAPTCHAs. CAPTCHAs, I'm going to explain CAPTCHA as a separate video, but just to know that CAPTCHAs are those little pieces of puzzles that you come across every now and then when you try to log into a new web page, which identifies whether you're a human or you are a robot trying to access, right? So CAPTCHAs are one of the most inaccessible things because they're difficult for people with disabilities on different levels, sometimes physical, sometimes cognitive, sometimes vision. So it really depends, and it is one of the most inaccessible things. So it's required that CAPTCHAs should have an option for every type of modality of disability, and and they should have alternatives. They should also have things like access to a person or a human, so that people can with disabilities can bypass this by making a phone call, reaching out to a customer service person, and such. Also, it is suggested not to really use CAPTCHAs, but if you have to, then please make sure that there are alternatives, text alternatives, because otherwise sometimes people are lost so much that they cannot log into websites. Also, that if you know this person's already a registered member, or you know that their authentication is already pre-done, then you can give them the option of overriding the CAPTCHA. They don't need to go through CAPTCHA. They can just directly log in and stuff. Okay, and then you have decoration and formatting elements, like elements which are particularly used for decorations. For example, you have a box and there's an outline to that box. There's content within it. That outline needs to be made decorative, maybe, or not in the programming sense. Like, I'm talking if it's an image used there, or if there is a background image, that automatically becomes a decoration element. Also, the way that you do this is by marking them as the alt attribute as an empty alt attribute, or you can, like I said, use CSS and make that a background image. Or you can, there is an ARIA role, which is called ARIA role, which is a role is equal to presentation, which is not recommended so much to be used if you have these other alternative ways to solve the issue. Okay, let's now quickly read through the intent on the WCAG notes. So the intent of this success criteria is to make information conveyed by non-text content accessible through the use of a text alternative. Text alternatives are a primary way for making information accessible because they can be rendered through any sensory modality, for example, visual, auditory, or tactile, to match the needs of the user. Providing text alternatives allows the information to be rendered in a variety of ways by a variety of user agents. For example, people who cannot see a picture can have the text alternative read aloud using synthesized speech. People who cannot hear a file can have the text alternative displayed so they can read it. In the future, text alternatives will also allow information to be more easily translated into sign language and into a simpler form of the same language. Another very important thing to note and to remember is that all text alternatives and any equivalents that you may have, they have to be provided in the same language as that is being used for the web page. For example, if a web page is in English, then the translations have to be in English. If the web page has been changed to, say, French or Portuguese, then the translations have to be according to that. In Canada, we mostly just are concerned ourselves with English and French. And so these are the two primary languages that are used, and text alternatives should be working according to the language that has been selected. For the first and the most simplest method of testing to see if alt text is in place for the images, I'm using this website, unsplash.com. It has a lot of images in here. They should all have alt text describing the images that are on here because this is meaningful content for this website, right? So I'm just going to first just check it with what we call a bookmarklet. And so we're going to use the images bookmarklet here. And I see that there are, okay, so this has been marked as a decorative image. Makes sense because this is not of particular content interest to the website. This is also marked as a decorative image, and that's good. So you have, this has an alt text, man loading hay bales into a ship container. That's correct. So this will let you know if there are alt texts, but you have to actually physically go in and check that the alt text is making sense with the image or the non-text content that that it represents, because many times you will find automated alt text put in. So the alt text has been auto-generated and they don't make sense with the images. So it's a good idea to check. And I see most of them do make sense here. So you can see that the images are all making good sense. Young woman look at the window thoughtfully. So they have good text alternatives. And the names over here of the authors. It's also giving you an alternative which says go to Logan Weaver at this profile. Okay, so this is a very good example of when you can you use images and you don't describe the image, but you describe the purpose of the image. So what's the purpose of this? It says it goes to the person's profile to and it's like a button, like an image used as a button, right? So yeah, so these are good. Okay, so we noticed that the alt text is not there for all the images. So you see from here, these images don't have these alt text. That's very interesting. So the alt text was there only for the first few of them, not all of them. And maybe because these are dynamically being picked up, but they should be picking it up, and with the alt text should be provided for all the images on the web page. So yeah, that's one issue we've identified already over here. But this is what we would use to just quickly see if the images are in place. And sorry, if the alt text is in place for all the images and the graphics on the website. The next simple way to identify that your alt text are in place is to simply run a automated tool. Automated tools are good at picking up any issues that are there. So I'm using the CIBC website as an example for this one, and I'm going to do a wave run on it, which is a wave evaluation tool, and we see that there are 5 errors. It's talking about an empty link. So there are links which don't have text labels on them or don't have text between them. That's an empty link. Okay. A broken ARIA menu and a broken skip link. And then there are suspicious alternative text. Okay, orphaned form labels. So there are form labels which have been orphaned, which are not being used somewhere, right? Okay, interesting. But mostly we see that the labels are in place. And if you take a closer look over here, you see this is a label called skip links. You have, I'm just wanting to find examples of ARIA labeled by, ARIA labels, so we know what they look like and how they are used. So over here we have an ARIA label for find a branch or ATM, which is this. So there is a physical label and there is an ARIA label too, which is a good thing. And then you have an H2 here. Okay, fine. Then you have ARIA labeled by, this is the ID. So basically ARIA labeled by would refer to an ID, and the ID will have a description. So when we run this, let's run over this page with a screen reader to ensure that all the text alternatives are making sense and the labels are making sense with the content that's on the page. So but when we test with different methods just to find any issues that might be there. Okay. Let's also just quickly run a bookmarklet on here so we can see if the images are marked correctly. And so this has an alt of, it's made decorative. Okay, but that's the logo, but it has been made decorative. Okay, yeah, you could do that, but it would be nice to just say CIBC there. So you know where you've, like it's a logo and you know where you are. Here it says CIBC logo. We will also run Axe DevTools to see if there are any issues that we might identify. So I'm going to inspect this first and go ahead and run Axe DevTools. Okay, so I'm going to do a full page scan, see what we come up with. There are 4 issues in all. Actually, for a website, 4 issues like these ones are, it's a very minimal amount. CIBC is very good with their accessibility, the way ahead. So this is good. And then we have 4 links that must be discernible. So let's see what the first one is. It is referring to the logo. So interesting, but the logo has a role of link and the accessible text has been made empty. So we had seen that the accessible text was empty for this logo. But if it is a link, it should have a discernible text, and that's an issue. So that's what that says there. To solve this problem, you need to fix at least one of the following. Elements do not have text that is visible. Element does not have text that is visible to the screen readers. ARIA label attribute does not exist and is empty. ARIA labeled by attribute does not exist, and element has no title attribute. To fix the element is in a tab order and does not have accessible text. So there basically has to be accessible text somehow added to it, which is a text alternative. So we will use VoiceOver and see how it works with the CIBC website, trying to understand if the labels are in place for all the interactive elements on the website. Another way is you can just basically right-click and inspect. Let me bring this down so we can see it more clearly. And you could just go to each of these and see if it has any of the information for the labels correctly in there. It says corporate profile, that will be announced correctly. So that's another way to go through and check, is to go and see. Okay, if you go to your sign on button, you can see it's a button. On click, type submit, ID, class button, primary, and it says sign on. It should, okay, and it does have the class show for screen readers right there. Right. Okay, let me lock this one somehow. Oh, let me, I do. Okay. So yeah, so here you can see it has the show for screen readers. So when the screen reader goes over this label would read sign on to CIBC Online Banking. It has this class which is specifically only for screen readers. So that's how this would work. Okay. This is another way to check. So you can actually manually go in and check each of the labels that are in there, either with this inspect, or you can actually use a screen reader and go through reading the entire page. So now we will go through with a screen reader. And I'm using VoiceOver, like I said.
About CIBC, CIBC web content, visited, link, comma, about CAPTCHA HTML, banner. Search, opens in a dialog window, button.
Okay, so it says search, it says opens in a dialog window, and it's a button. We will come back and see how it's coded later.
Link, locations, opens in a new window. Link, contact us, opens in a new window. Sign on to CIBC Online Banking, button, group.
Yeah, so it picks up the entire, like both the spans, they're labeled correctly, and with that class that they've coded, it does pick up the entire label.
Menu pop-up expanded. Visited, link, corporate profile, visited, link, explore corporate, link, executive team, link, inclusion, menu corporate profile, link, quick fact, link, history, menu 2 items, level 2. Menu pop-up collapsed. Visited, link, corporate profile.
Okay, so the learn more buttons are not coded properly because they aren't really saying anything about what you're going to learn more about. So it should actually announce, just like how the sign on button did. This should say maybe learn more about how CIBC board seeks to maintain a high level of expertise, or learn more about corporate governance, or something like related to it, so you know where you're going, right? It doesn't have to be visible on the screen, the whole text, but because you have context from this piece of text.
CIBC's board seeks to maintain a high level of expertise and independence for itself. Group.
Okay, so you don't need that, but learn more should be more explicitly explaining where it goes. So right now the learn more buttons are literally invisible. They aren't saying anything. So as a assistive device user now, I don't know that there is this button there. I just don't know we're going over the learn more. I just think we're clicking through something.
Link, 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 link. Resolving your complaints. Menu 1 item. Level 2.
Again, learn more does nothing.
Visited. Link, 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 link. Share. Link, 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 link. Contact us. Menu 3 items. Level 2.
Okay, I'm just going with the arrow keys because we know it has the same behavior for all of those. And Shift tab takes me there. What's there? Okay.
Visited. Link. Explore career. Link. Visited. Link. 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 Visit. Link. Corporate. Menu or career areas 5 items. Level 2.
Okay, it's not really announcing about. See, right now it's here. So these don't have proper labels, is what I'm thinking. The learn mores are not announcing as well. This could also be a screen reader issue. Maybe this works really well with NVDA on Windows, but technically it should also work with a Mac machine. None of these labels are reading out. For what reason, I'm not sure. Let's see, control. Option.
Corporate profile vertical line about CIBC vertical line CIBC, web content, skip links, navigation, list 3 items, link, skip to online banking, link, skip to content, link, skip to navigation, list 7 items, visited, link, personal, visited, link, business, link, commercial, link, imperial service, visited, link, wealth, visited, link, about CIBC, visited, link, CIBC websites, corporate profile vertical line about CIBC vertical line CIBC Google Chrome, Megana, window, corporate profile vertical line about CIBC vertical line CIBC Google Chrome. Voiceover off.
Okay, so if there are labels in here and they are on interactive elements and they focus on there, those labels should be announced clearly by the screen readers. And also, we need to also understand another thing about labels, which is that there is a priority on how these labels get rendered. So if you put a labeled ARIA labeled by, it oversees, like it overrides all the different labels on there, and that's the label that's read. So it's not a good idea. Like I've seen lots of places where people put every kind of label within one element with the hopes that something is read out. But it's a very confusing thing. The priority should be to put a label for using the label tag or using a ARIA labeled by because it's visible on the text. So a visible a label is a priority. You would also then try to put an ARIA label if you don't have another option, but try to use native HTML before you try to use ARIA, because ARIA should only be used if native HTML cannot give you that that feature. So if you have an option with an image to use an alt text, just use the alt text. If you need to make an image into a link, then you would use maybe an ARIA label because you don't want it to be seen. For example, just these images here that we see, right? The search and these are icons, but these are also links. They've been made into links, so I'm sure they must have an ARIA label an ARIA label. It's yeah, so they have this, right? Like we saw, they have a separate span, and that has the label within it. So I don't know if this turns up this way because it's rendered this way or it's coded this way, but whatever the case, we need to make sure that these labels are in place. Okay. A lot of people would create an ARIA label for this icon, and it gets announced. But this is the best way. what you see here. Okay, so this is it for the success criteria 1.1.1 non-text content. There are more related success criteria that we would reach at some point, but for this, I think this is a lot of information, and so I'll stop right here. If you need more and you need to learn more, yes, WCAG documentation is the best. You can just go there and read about it. There's a lot. There are like different examples, there are techniques. So if you go down on this, it'll give you the different techniques that you could see with examples. Where do you use ARIA label? Where do you use ARIA labeled by? Where do you use an alt text? Where do you use don't use alt title. Title is like the worst, but if you have to do, where do you use it and how? So things like that, all that information is right there with examples. It's a lot to go through within the videos, so take time to go and read this. It's a lot of good information. So I've just given a gist and understanding of what the success criteria is about and the different ways that you can test this to see that things are in place. Okay, so thank you and hope to see you in another video. If you like, please like, share, and subscribe.